Recording now. Great. Jess, thank you so much for joining me. I feel like this conversation is several years in the making, but we're here now.
Right. I know. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad we're finally able to connect after all this time
I
online.
know. So I can't even remember how I first found your writing, but I fell in love straight away and felt like you were touching on so many of my internal thoughts, feelings, and frustrations about the beauty industry. And I find that these conversations, we don't often have the opportunity to have them in the industry. And whether that's founder to founder, whether that's retailers and founders, whether that's customers and founders, there's a lot of fear and trepidation about having these conversations and appreciating like the gray and the space between and the nuance of what we are in and what we've been working with and against over all of these years. So I'm excited to just have this chat with you and be really honest myself and sort of tell you what goes on in my own head as a founder, but also
Yeah.
as someone who is existing as a consumer in the beauty industry and trying to figure it out along the way.
Yeah, I feel the same. It's like very refreshing to be able to like speak openly with somebody who's on like the brand side of things or even somebody on the media side of the beauty industry. Like, yeah, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors and everyone wants to put on their best face, obviously. So it's nice to dive into the nitty-gritty.
Totally. And so, yeah, I'm going to get stuck into asking some of the questions that we typically ask on our podcast pretty hard, just because I think it's familiar for our audience. But then I really want to throw it over to you and for you to ask me questions at any point in time. And I love to be challenged and I love to be like kept honest in what I'm doing. And if I don't have the perfect scripted answer or any answer, like I will just say that to you because, again, as I mentioned,
Yeah.
I'm figuring so much out myself.
Yeah.
But what we do ask everyone is if you could, in one word, describe your relationship to beauty right now, what would that be?
I think my one word would be fraught.
Mm, great.
Yeah.
And yeah, maybe go into that for me.
I mean, I think I'm someone who's always been very obsessed with beauty. And by beauty, I mean my own physical appearance. And for so much of my life, based so much of not only like my self worth and self image, but like also my hobbies, my confidence, the way I like moved through the world on beauty. Like so much of it hinged on what I looked like and how I felt about what I looked like. And as I start to like deconstruct some of that through my work, reporting on the beauty industry and sort of peeling back the layers of beauty culture, it doesn't make it easier for me to navigate that relationship necessarily all the time. It's like now I understand the influences that have sort of contributed to my obsession with my own appearance, but the obsession is still there. It's just now I have to do the hard work of like talking myself through it and talking myself out of it and reminding myself like there are other things to value and work toward in my life separate from aesthetic goals.
Definitely. And do you think, when you say that, it brought up for me, do you think that there is an end goal where obsession with beauty stops? Or for you, is it about existing with those parts of you that might be obsessed? Or for like me personally, like the flux of obsession?
I don't necessarily think it's like I don't think there is an end goal where I'm finally going to be free from all beauty culture conditioning because like I still exist in the world and that's just always going to be there. I think there is going to hopefully be, as time goes on, more freedom in that relationship. Um, and I think the biggest thing for me is reimagining, like not necessarily not being obsessed with beauty, but like having a healthier understanding of beauty. Like for me now, it's helpful to, like when I'm talking about the beauty industry, it's, I like to think of it as now the appearance industry and realizing that beauty is sort of like this inherent human longing, like beauty, freedom, truth, love. I don't think it's wrong to be obsessed with beauty. I think it is not healthy to be obsessed with one's own physical appearance. And through beauty culture, we've kind of been taught that beauty, this like intense longing within us, is our own physical appearance. So to me, I hope that there's a point where like those two things are completely separated and I can tell the difference and feel the difference. And like maybe my obsession with beauty is no longer about my own body, but about being surrounded by beauty in other ways.
Yeah, I remember hearing this sort of quote, or it was a bit of a riff on the like, it was saying, if ignorance is bliss, then knowledge is power or freedom. And that really reigns true for me in terms of my journey in the beauty industry. And I think that my personal relationship to beauty was quite ignorant in the beginning. I was almost just sort of unaware and participating in beauty culture. And I probably didn't need to be aware either. I mean, I was a teenager in my 20s. I was thinking about other stuff.
Right.
And I was happy not thinking about it. And then doing this deep dive over the years on what I'm confronted with through Fluff and the other brands I engage with or the content that I'm consuming, sort of expanding my knowledge set has been super challenging. And sometimes I have these moments where I wish I could go back to that blissfully ignorant state where I wasn't questioning, where I wasn't, having these sort of hard conversations with people or these debates. But it has felt empowering and it has felt freeing. And when you spoke about that word freedom, I wondered what that meant for you, if it was connected directly to knowledge and understanding.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. And I think like what you're talking about is basically just like the human condition. That's what happens as we like grow older and mature and we're in the world and we develop these skills to sort of like see what's going on around us and understand it and understand our place in it. What jumped out at me with what you were saying was like this idea of being younger, being unaware, and participating in beauty culture. And that's kind of like this first stage. And then I feel like both of us are probably at this place where we are aware and we're still participating. And I think maybe this idea of freedom for me is when I am aware and I'm barely participating, but that feels like a long ways to go, a long journey, like a good goal, but maybe not a quick goal.
Yeah, I definitely want to get stuck into later what, I guess like barely participating means for you. And I think it will mean different things to a lot of different people.
Yeah.
But perhaps we can just sort of maybe go back and start with what your earliest memory of beauty is, or any significant memories.
I think my earliest memory of beauty would be probably around like age 5 or 6. I was in beauty pageants.
Really?
I guess I had asked my mom to sign me up for beauty pageants, is what she says. I don't remember that, but I remember participating in them. Like they were like little local things like Miss Sayreville Petite or like Miss New Jersey. And I remember, I mean, I'm thankful that my mom didn't put me in like full pageant makeup, but there was makeup. I had like a little pink caboodle full of all my stuff. I like vividly remember it having the pink and green tube of Maybelline Great Lash mascara and CoverGirl Cheekers blush. So it was like a natural makeup look, but it was like literally a natural makeup look for a 5 or 6 year old. So
Yeah.
I started young.
And those memories, like you sound happy kind of reflecting on that. So is that memory a joyful one?
It's not a sad one.
Yeah.
I think looking back, I might be like a little like there's maybe some grieving or some mourning of just like, oh man, I learned these lessons so young and they really stuck. But I did love performing at that age. And what I loved about the beauty pageants was the talent portion. Like I loved to do a song and dance. And so I think when I think back to the beauty pageants, I remember mostly like the talent show and getting to sing a little song and wear an outfit and do a dance and getting praised for that. And I think that's like the more enduring memory of that time. But of course, beauty was a part of it. And then I sort of carried that lesson with me for a long time where it was, I did want to perform. I wanted to sing. I wanted to be a singer-songwriter. And so much of that to me was tied up in the aesthetics of what a famous singer-songwriter might look like, what she might wear, how she might do her makeup. And I really became, I really sidelined my true passions, which I guess for the purposes of this conversation was music, in order to like create this aesthetic construction of what someone with that passion might look like,
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting that you couldn't have one without the other. Why that pageant
Yeah.
couldn't just be about the performing or the talent. It is such a strange thing to have a category around aesthetics for someone so young.
Right. But now that I think about it and in the work that I do, it makes so much sense. Like I was thinking not too long ago about the celebrity beauty brand boom and why it's happening, why customers like sort of inherently trust these celebrities to create good beauty products or good skincare products. And I think a big part of it is that like beauty is the first job of almost any performer, especially and almost exclusively if you are a woman. Like in order to get to do the thing that you are good at, when you're like a celebrity, whether it's singing, dancing, acting, you also have to be beautiful. It's like requirement number one.
Mm.
And so I think it's sort of embedded in our idea of celebrity, of performance, that like beauty comes first and then your talent. Then you have a chance to prove yourself via your talent, you know?
Yeah, I do. I have lots of thoughts and feelings. Okay, so if you have that memory at 5, can you talk me through maybe some other defining moments for you that have still um, perhaps influenced how you see yourself today?
Yeah, I think another big moment was um, I did community theater when I was a kid, all the way up through high school. And makeup was a big part of theater as well. It was a big part of like constructing a character. And I think that really influenced how I thought about beauty, even in my personal life, off of the stage. It got to the point where I was wearing like a full face of makeup every day to go to CVS to buy toilet paper. And it was like I was constructing this character of Jessica for all to see. So I think that was another big one for sure. Um, and I think just this idea of these like intertwined ideas of fame and ambition and success were like very important to me. Growing up, I don't know if it was like an American thing or a millennial thing, but it just seemed like to be successful as a woman, like necessarily meant some sort of fame, some sort of recognition, some sort of like being seen. And to me, that it all came back to beauty in one
Mm.
sense or the other.
Did you have any direct? Um, I've talked to a lot of our guests about their relationship with their mother and their mother's relationship to beauty because, or often as their primary caregiver, like how that tone is set for them. And if at all
Mm.
you sort of felt like you were emulating what your mother did, or if she potentially had an influence on how you saw yourself or how you spoke to yourself, or did you witness her talking to herself in a certain way?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like now that you mentioned that, I do think probably one of my more even earlier memories of makeup was watching my mom put on makeup, and I would call it her muck-a-muck. That was like what I thought makeup was. And I would like pantomime her, like putting on her eyeliner, her mascara, her lipstick. And I think my mom didn't have like a necessarily like unhealthy or very strict relationship with makeup or beauty standards, but she wore it. She wore it especially if she was going to be going out, being seen. So I think I learned a lot about like presentability and what's expected of you if like you leave the house or other people are going to see you or other people are going to judge you
Mm,
based on how you present yourself outside of the home maybe.
yeah.
But I mean, as far as like mother daughter beauty body relationships go, I did have it pretty easy in that sense.
Yeah, it's one I've been thinking about. I have a similar memory of watching my mum do her makeup, and I would sort of sit on top of the toilet like bench, and she had those little kind of bluey green Clinique eyeshadows, and I was fascinated, and I remember the feeling of like longing to be able to do that one day and participate in that, because I was just like, this is what an older woman does or a mum does. And
Yes.
one part of me can look at that and be like, that's so like strange that a child would be like, this is being a woman or this is being a mother putting makeup on. But then I think, was that sort of act or that experience, quite a simple, innocent rite of passage for a young girl, or a moment of connection and something really nice for my mum to share with me? And would I not want to give that to a daughter if I had one? And that's what's a big internal conflict for me ongoing, is like, what parts of beauty represent connection, and what is actually like taking away from connection.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I think about this all of the time, because critiquing beauty, critiquing the beauty industry very often means being confronted with the fact that because of how society is constructed and women's roles and what's expected of women, like beauty salons, nail salons end up being these centers of connection for women, of communication for women, and they're like sacred spaces. And I think it's a real challenge to push back on beauty culture that tells us our moments of connection, our moments of like family love, our moments of self-care have to be constructed around this idea of perfecting and optimizing your body.
Yeah.
I do think that there's a way to preserve like the special moments between like a mother and daughter, and learning how to become an adult, how to become a woman. I think there's a way to preserve like these moments of connection at the nail salon, or when you're getting your hair done and talking to your stylist, without necessarily recreating these like oppressive and harmful beauty standards that often come with those things. Like, I
Yeah.
think they can be separated, but it is really tough.
Mm. Yeah, it's very tricky. I liken my sort of relationship with beauty. It can sound strange, but it's been sort of quite a spiritual journey for me as well. And it's like deeply personal and for each person. But I liken it to my relationship with like craving or aversion, and wanting something or not wanting another, and sort of trying to accept that it is this sort of tumultuous relationship. It's going to have its ups and downs, and it is not about completely omitting these experiences from my life, but also not relying on them or not craving them or thinking that it's the answer, and feeling like that defines my worth. But that has sort of allowed me to participate at times in the industry, but it does take sort of constant critique. And I have moments where I doubt myself to be like, in what way am I participating right now? Is it out of lack? Am I craving something? Am I thinking this is the answer? Or is it sort of more from a grounded place?
Right. And I don't think it's necessarily wrong to be acting out of a place of lack or wanting or craving. Like, these are very human things.
Yeah.
These are very human needs. A lot of times, like, I'll talk about beauty behaviors as cosmetic coping mechanisms. Like, we are faced with a lot of pressures in modern society, especially in like the virtual digital age, and our bodies being just like out there more than at almost any other point in history, like being perceived constantly. And that, causes a lot of anxiety and stress. And one of the ways that we can cope with that is through beauty, through these physical tools of beauty. And I don't think that's necessarily wrong. A lot of what I try to push back on in my work, which I think you do such an amazing job of, is matching that to the correct messaging. Like, if we're operating from a place of lack, if we're operating from a place of anxiety, if we're operating from a place of, oh, I feel this is a flaw to be fixed, I think it's really important to be able to say that and to tell the truth about that, and not be like, oh, this is actually empowerment. This is an act of self-care and self-love. Like, it's not that. It doesn't mean you can't do it if it's not an act of care or love. It just means, let's be honest about our motivations. the cultural influences that are prompting these behaviors and just tell the truth about them. And that necessarily leads to like a much healthier, more fulfilling relationship with the tools of physical beauty. Like, it's not that we need to stop. It's just that we like need to tell the truth about when they stem from something that's like not actually so great for us.
Yes, I agree. I think that, this conversation about telling the truth, for me, I had to start speaking the truth to myself. And I feel like that's the hardest thing for everyone, to have these honest conversations with ourselves.
Yeah.
And I know you've written about potentially or one of the tipping points for you being working on the Kardashian app and the experiences you had there. And I feel like you've written enough about that, and people can do a lot of back research if they haven't before. But
Yeah.
I was sort of curious if that was, the biggest thing for you, or if you feel like this truth telling or truth seeing has been this gradual sort of like simmering pot that eventually has spilled over, that you were like, I can't not keep this truth from the rest of the world. Or
It's definitely been a long process, and there have been a couple of different like tipping points, but it's like anything else. There are very few linear journeys in life, right? So it's not like a direct draw line from A to B. I worked for the Kardashians and now I'm turning the industry on its head. Like, there were a lot of points in between. And what's been interesting for me is like, even with all of my behind the scenes knowledge of beauty marketing and beauty brands and the beauty media, it's still very easy for me to get sucked back into it. So I had that moment after I left the Kardashian-Jenner apps where I was like, I'm going to tell the truth about the beauty industry. And I started freelancing as a reporter. And gradually I just got sucked back into the industry. And over time I was like, well, it's not a problem if I'm focusing on clean beauty and eco-friendly beauty. And I just got pulled back into this lifestyle of overconsumption and using a ton of products. And I somehow convinced myself like this wasn't the same exact issue, because now it was, quote unquote, clean ingredients. Now it was biodegradable boxes that were piling up on my front door. And it took another big moment of realization for me to make another pivot and like get a little bit closer to that truth that I had been craving. And I feel like those moments have happened to me over and over and over again, despite the fact that I'm like well aware of all of the tricks of the trade. But it's beauty culture is a powerful thing, and it is a project to stay aware and to examine your own motivations.
Can you recall some of the initial like internal or personal questioning you did? So for me, example, they seem superficial, but we're literally talking about these superficial things. I just remember one day being like, why do I feel like why am I putting makeup on? And I had never really questioned that. I was like, I'm just doing it. Or I was like, why do I feel like my partner is not going to like me when they wake up next to me without makeup on? Or like, why does my mum change outfit to go to work as opposed to just wearing what she was wearing? Or why don't I like this one photo of me, but then this one I do? And I got quite obsessed with why, and just really trying to be like, am I on like autoplay, or am I actually thinking about the decisions I'm making? And it was, again, this really like empowering journey to go on that I'm still going on. And I think this is the journey of life, is asking why we do the things we do. So I'm wondering if you have a similar experience, or why questions that you've started asking, and that how it's evolved.
Completely. I mean, I relate to that so much. I've definitely had moments that made me question everything. I think a big one was when I was dealing with a big skin issue. I had dermatitis. My dermatologist had given me topical steroids. I had a really bad reaction to the steroids. Long story short, I went into topical steroid withdrawal. My skin's peeling off of my face. I can't like even splash water on my face without being in pain. I can't put makeup on. I had to exist in the world like a Freddy Krueger type face falling off situation, which was extreme. But at the same time, it woke me up to how much of my own, like, how much of my self-worth had been tied up in what I looked like and how I could present myself. And when I didn't feel beautiful, I truly did not feel worthy of even existing, of having people look at me, of having people listen to me, of going out with friends. I canceled all my plans. I sat home in my apartment. And that really kickstarted me just like starting to question, am I worth anything other than what I look like? I'm not treating myself as if I am, so I must not think that. And like, how do I construct a sense of self that's not dependent on feeling like I look okay? So that was a big moment for me. And then around that same time, I remember I had to go into work like that. And it really brushed up against all these ideas of like being presentable or looking professional and what was expected of a woman in the workplace. And I remember there was this time where the first day I came into work like that without makeup, with my skin like peeling and oozing, my boss called me into her office and she closed the door behind me and she said, "I just want to say you are still so beautiful to me." And it was so insulting. And it was like she was trying to be
Yes.
nice, but I think that was the first time I was like, what does beautiful mean? Because what she is saying is not that I'm physically beautiful right now. I know that I'm not. So what does she mean by beautiful? She means like worthy. She means like capable. And how has beauty and beautiful been used as a stand-in term throughout society for these other things? And how can I start like pulling that apart and figuring out what I actually value? Because beauty means worth. It means confidence. It means community. It means, professional. It means successful. How can I like start peeking behind the curtain of what we mean when we say this beauty as this catch-all phrase?
Yeah.
And like figure out like what we're all actually talking about, because it definitely isn't beauty.
And I mean, the fact that she used the word still, like that language is, and like you said, her intentions were probably pure, but as I'm learning in life, intention is one thing, but it's not necessarily how it's received. And I think people use intention as a scapegoat often, or many brands do. And my big
Yes.
gripe is around language in the beauty industry. And I'm not saying Fluff is perfect either. And that's a big, I mean, we'll get to this. I know there were questions you wanted to ask me, but when we think about anti-aging conversations or marketing, or we just feel about the clean beauty market and just these words that brands throw into their taglines or their product descriptions that they think are like enforcing or reinforcing positive message, but they're actually like very deeply at their core quite negative.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah. It's like a lot of the messaging is negative, and also it like renders the actual, like the brands that are using that language in a way that means something, it like renders all of it meaningless
Yes.
to me. I mean, we can get into it. There's a lot to be said there.
So I wanted to ask you then, like, what do you think about when you think about the future of beauty? Like, this was one of Fluff's taglines, is that the future of beauty is more than makeup. And that was sort of where I started, where I was like, it can't just be about what you put on your face. Like, it has to be more. And I was like, there must have been a time where the word beauty was positive, whereas for me now it has so many negative connotations. And like Fluff exists to discuss exactly what the future could be, or we're trying to invite people into creating that narrative or making that up for themselves, not following what someone else says. So that's sort of my question for you. Like, what do you think about the idea of the future of beauty? And do you think that there is a version that isn't toxic? And if so, do you think that we'll see that in our lifetime?
I love that question, and I love your explanation of the future of beauty, because it makes me like think of this question in a whole new light. Like, when you're describing your future of beauty as being more than makeup and being more than like what we put on our bodies, I actually like, in my head, I go to the past. Like, that feels like the origins of beauty to me. That feels like what beauty was and is before it was sort of co-opted by all of these sort of oppressive forces and industrialization. Like, that definition of beauty for sure exists somewhere. And And when I think of getting there, I think of like peeling back, stripping away. Like it doesn't, I love your framing of it as being a future of beauty, because I do think that's maybe a more productive framework than the way I think about it, which is like going back to like what beauty used to be. But what immediately comes to mind when I think of the future of beauty is I'm picturing, I think I would have been more hopeful about this maybe 5 years ago, but I see just like homogenous features, cyborgian beauty, sort of like a dystopian thing. I think I was really hopeful for a more diverse, inclusive, less product driven future of beauty years ago, but it's sort of been a little unsettling, especially through the pandemic, to see how the beauty industry has only grown and beauty standards have gotten more restrictive and technology based, and we're emulating like these digital avatars, and our beauty icons aren't even human anymore. Like I think of like glazed donut skin and latte makeup and like blueberry milk nails. Like we don't even want to emulate impossibly beautiful women anymore. Like we want to turn ourselves into objects, consumable objects. And so that, I mean, that's what immediately comes up for me when I think of the future of beauty. But
And it must be hard
like
for
yours
you,
better.
because the conversations that I have with people too is that in certain silos, you can think that it is becoming more inclusive, and we see these niche brands popping up, or maybe they have 30,000 followers, or maybe they even have 100,000, but they pale in comparison or in scale to these bigger brands that are dominating the narrative. And that's what I often have to remind some people or consumers, is that we're not making any progress, but I think it is still being thwarted by the bigger companies with the bigger budgets, with the celebrity endorsements. And I know that was sort of, you wanted to get into talking about celebrity brands, and it was something for me as well. Like my question that I deal with every day is like, can Fluff compete with these celebrity or influencer brands? That is kind of separate to the question of like, should we still exist? But I think it's really tricky, and I can see why these celebrities are embarking on the industry or starting their ventures. You know, previously they just used to put their face to a brand and get paid, you know, a reasonable check size, but now they can continually get that check coming in. I don't think it means that they should, just because they can.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very hard for Fluff, and that is on the, you know, every second day where I wonder, what is the point of us trying when there is someone with a much bigger stage and several microphones more than we have.
Right. I mean, I really try not to center any brands like indie, big corporation or otherwise in my reporting, but I do think that there is a very necessary space in the industry for Fluff and for brands like of your size with your type of messaging. I think imagining a future of the beauty industry where it's more about smaller brands servicing smaller communities, like that to me feels really sustainable. That to me feels really hopeful. I think like a better question, I mean, not for you, obviously, you have to be concerned with your own company, but like a better question for customers, founders is not like, can indie brands compete, but like how can bigger brands like degrow for the sake of like the environment, for the sake of just our general well-being? Like, I don't think I think a better project that should be top of mind for customers is encouraging these large corporations to focus on degrowth, rather than forcing all of these indie brands to have to scale up and like necessarily abandon their values in order to be acquired or to compete with one of the like 6 mega conglomerates that owns much of the beauty industry. You know, like I support the idea of smaller independent brands just like servicing less people.
Yes, definitely.
No?
And I wanted to touch on that because I've noticed a lot of brands moving their focus from revenue to profitability. And that's really interesting for me because I think it does kind of open up this discussion around degrowth. But I personally can't think of an example in the beauty industry or perhaps even outside. Maybe I could find something in fashion, but I'm wondering if you have an example of degrowth at all that.
I mean, that's a great question. I definitely don't have any examples in the beauty industry that I've like seen. I know it's a big topic of conversation, especially in climate spaces. And it's something that I would like to see talked about more in the climate space, especially like eco-friendly, quote unquote, eco-friendly beauty is such a huge area of interest in the beauty industry overall right now. Like the growth rate for sustainable products is huge. And to me, that's just such an
I
oxymoron.
know.
Like if you look at like the sector of the beauty industry that's experiencing one of the biggest growth trajectories, it's this idea of sustainability. And those things are just like inherently at
I
odds.
know. I always felt
So no, I
very,
don't think we have good examples
yeah,
yet.
I always felt very uncomfortable being asked to talk on a sustainability panel in regards to beauty. And because while we offer refills, I was like, we're producing, and the most sustainable thing we can do is stop. Um, and yet here we
Yeah.
are. And, then should I be talking about these small steps? It's tricky. And when I reflect on it, I'm like, maybe Fluff in a way could be an example in the future of degrowth, or perhaps just the first 2 years of business compared to where we are now. In that, I started Fluff off the back of Frank Body, which was very much sort of an aggressive grow at all costs business. And I was in that mindset too. It was sort of all I knew. And I wanted to build a better version or have more of an emotional connection to customers, but I was still very hell bent on growing at the rate that we did at Frank. And I remember speaking to a potential investor early on, and he said to me, do you feel confident that you'll be able to build this into a $200 million business in 10 years? And I was like, okay, I don't know. And I don't think I even realized like what that looked like or what was possible. But it seemed aspirational. I was like, oh, okay, yes. And then the last 5 years, I feel like I have turned myself inside out and really assessed again why I would want to do that, who I was doing that for, what was the point, and realized that there is a version of Fluff making $10 million a year. There is a version of Fluff making $1 million a year. There is a version of Fluff making less that is also successful. And again, that is not maybe harming the planet, or is like the biggest driver for me is not harming, I guess, the mental health of consumers, because I almost feel like there's a flow-on effect when you deal with like the consumer's mental health and they'll care for everything around them.
I think there's a direct correlation there for sure of just like I always say, like if we want to address sustainability, we need to address beauty standards. We need to address why we feel so compelled to consume so much and to manipulate our bodies so much in order to just feel like baseline okay about ourselves. If those things were addressed, sustainability would be addressed as well.
Yes.
Because like there are feelings driving our consumption.
And why do you think it's such a hard,
like systems driving our consumption?
Yeah. Why do you think it is such a hard question to ask of ourselves? And I say that with an answer in my own head, because I originally started asking people like, why do you wear makeup? And no one could answer it. And I just think they hadn't thought about it before. And then I would keep drilling down and, they'd say, oh, it makes me feel good. And I'd say, cool. Like, why does it make you feel good? And they'd say, well, I just look a little bit like better, or I feel fresher. And I was like, okay, why do you feel better or fresher? And they're like, I look like glowy and good. And I'm like, okay, well, but why when you aren't wearing makeup, why does that feel bad or not girly or good? And then it would just always be silence. And I'd kind of see
Right.
their eyes kind of like glaze over and they'd be like, oh. And then I felt like I would maybe be leading them a little bit by being like, do you think it's because you've been told that, you know, not looking glowy or whatever is not
Right.
beautiful? And then I'd say, like, who do you think has told you that? And then it would start kind of unraveling and they'd be like, I guess I saw that in magazines, or I guess I saw that on TV, or I guess I heard my mum talking about it this way, or I guess I was in a relationship in which they spoke about me in that way. And that's when you just see this like thread come loose in people. But it's so hard because you almost have to admit your participation. And
Mm-hmm.
I think there's potentially, well, for me personally, there was shame tied to it. And, you know,
So much
it,
shame.
it almost opened up another can of worms being like, oh, I didn't value myself enough to be then caught up in that narrative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of shame there, and like that breeds defensiveness,
Mm.
and that like defensive reaction just like makes for such an impenetrable wall sometimes. Yeah, I think a much more like generative question than why does so and so beauty behavior make you feel good is what has made you feel bad about that in the first place? And could we maybe be more productive addressing those things rather than your individual feeling good? I don't think that I mean, I think there is way too much shame around our physical selves for the majority of people, especially women. I think that shame is socially constructed, politically constructed. It's a technique, it's a tactic to keep us consuming and consumed. I think we need to address that political and social construction of shame and put the blame on systems and structures. And at the same time, I think we need to investigate our own like defense of the I feel good ideology
Mm.
and the individualism inherent in that and who that's actually serving. And why we think me feeling good is the ultimate end all be all goal. I think it's just naturally part of being human that you are not going to feel good all the time, nor should you feel good all of the time. Um, there is a lot of growth, learning, and understanding to come from not feeling good all of the time.
Mm.
And I think there's a lot to be explored in how do the things that make you feel good contribute to the cycles that are making the collective feel bad overall? And can we maybe shift the focus from self-care to collective care, knowing that you are a member of the collective and that over time prioritizing this sort of like collective care of deconstructing beauty standards will trickle into your feelings on yourself.
Mm.
Um, I mean, it's a very fraught topic, I think, and it's much easier to talk about in these like grand abstract terms like I am now than like, you know,
Yeah, but that's the thing. There's not,
than like putting it into practice on the individual level.
yeah, it's hard and it's going to be different for everyone. And I agree with you. I think it means accepting change and accepting like impermanence, or accepting this balance
Mm-hmm.
of good and bad, of young and old, of and that's why
Mm-hmm.
we obviously see this like resistance to aging. And it's because we want everything to feel good, we want everything to look good. We have labeled aging as not good, as opposed to just, it is what it is and it happens and it is a
Mm-hmm.
different state, but it's neither good or bad, it's just what we decide to assign to it.
It just happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. um so I guess one of the questions, the one thing that I still come up against with consumer conversations around when they're like, it makes me feel good, is that I can sit here and be like, you know what, I've got this, I've had a pretty privileged, literally, or experience in terms of my own beauty story, and that I haven't experienced what other people have. And they can say, you know, you can say to me, you can't, you shouldn't wear foundation because your skin is great. And they're like, wearing foundation for me genuinely has helped me leave the house and has given me the confidence. And that's something that I still often get stuck on and caught up on, where I want to say to them, hey, I get that and I want you to feel good and no one should ever take that away from you. But I also want you to, or one of our lines is like, it's okay to feel more with makeup so long as you don't feel less without it. And I want them to deal with that feeling of like, cool, you go out, you put it on and it gives you this confidence, but where is the acceptance without it? But it's like, can I have that conversation when I don't have their own lived experience with their beauty struggles or identity?
I mean, it's very difficult. I think part of the reason it is so hard to talk about beauty culture or offer these like prescriptive sort of solutions is because beauty is so personal. And because everyone has a personal relationship with beauty, they feel like the expert on beauty. That's something that I come up against a lot. Like I will offer these like deeply researched articles on a particular beauty standard that traces it back through centuries of history and conditioning and the forces that have created this standard, and like offer this like researched historical perspective on like how a certain standard is affecting us physically, psychologically, spiritually. And like the big pushback to it will be like, but I feel better with foundation on. Like that's my experience. And I think we can just like leave space for both of those things. Like your experience doesn't negate like the harmful history or construct of a particular standard. And the harmful like construct of a particular standard doesn't make you feel better when you feel like shit and you just want to put foundation on and not deal with your acne scars. Like those two things can coexist. And I think like one of the keys to a healthier relationship with beauty, like individually and collectively, is being able to, I mean, like I said earlier, participate and tell the truth about your participation. Like you don't have to say like, this is confidence boosting. Like you can say, oh, my confidence is at a deficit because of X, Y, and Z factors. And this like raises me to the bare minimum because we live in a fucked up fucking shitty world. Like, you know, I like,
yeah, I
pardon
love
my
that.
language, but like, I think both can be true. And then I think that like everyone is deconditioning from beauty culture or dealing with beauty culture at different levels. And that like, that is part of the genius construction of beauty culture as an oppressive force, is because we can never agree on one thing because we all have different experiences based on like our different identities. Like beauty is wrapped up in racism, colorism, ageism, ableism. There are all these intersecting identities that we are told are beautiful or are not beautiful. And it is, I mean, it's not right to tell somebody that like their particular experience of beauty or how they are responding to that beauty culture is wrong or like hurting other people when they've been hurt by the system too. So I don't know if that's a good answer. I just think that there are so many factors, and like we have to like make room for a more expansive understanding of like why we participate and like have it be okay that we're like doing something or using a product that like actually isn't for the greater good.
Yes.
That's okay. You're human. Like not everything we can do can necessarily be like a moral good.
No, I think it's a great answer in that it's not finite, right? Or it's like there is it leads to more questions, and hopefully it's something that both sides of the party can hold that space for each other to be like, you're right and you're also right, and maybe you could be wrong there, but maybe I could be wrong here. And to not respond so defensively, and to just be like, yeah, it's very personal, there's so much at play. What works for one person might not work for another, but hopefully it comes from this place of awareness.
Yeah. And I think it's much like it's less helpful to focus on individual behaviors and much more helpful to focus on brand behaviors and then like systemic, like political, economic motivations. Like if we can if we can take ourselves and our judgment of ourselves or other people's potential judgment of ourselves and our behaviors out of it and focus on like the bigger factors that are influencing beauty culture beyond your individual behaviors, I think we will be like much better off.
Yeah, definitely. So I know you wanted to sort of ask me a few questions, which I'm really excited about because, yeah, I find just so, even when I speak with other founders, they have this wall up and I will always be like, pardon the pun, but it's just like this glossy sort of exterior of like, everything's great and this is what it's like. And no one just will talk about how unbeautiful the beauty industry can be or how hard it is to be a brand or for what you're trying to achieve. So I'm open to you asking whatever you would like.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I love this. I love your openness.
Mm-hmm.
I think my biggest question about Fluff, from even when I was first introduced to the brand, like knowing your background with Frank Body, it's like based on your experience and like the ethos of Fluff, which is like you shouldn't feel less without makeup. I'm wondering like how and why you decided to take all of that learning and that messaging and focus on a product offering rather than something like immaterial, like editorial or like marketing consulting. Like how did you land on products being the vehicle for this message?
Yeah. So there's so many layers to this answer, but you said a really specific word, being like a vehicle. And that's been something that I talk about a lot, that Fluff or those compacts really are a vehicle for our message. And maybe I'm going to shoot myself in the foot here by also saying like those compacts are a bit of a Trojan horse for me, in that I feel like it is a way for me to connect or have an in with a consumer that may be obsessed with beauty or participating in the industry, but within it is a message. And once we get in via that physical connection, they start consuming our content. They start listening to what we talk about. They see that difference. So I just wanted to touch on that sort of like vehicle, like in terms of language, because that's really important for me.
Yeah.
But then also kind of share that, like, very honestly, when I started Fluff, I mentioned earlier that a lot of it was with the aspirations to build something bigger. I wanted to prove a lot to myself, admittedly, probably to my previous co-founders, to my investors, to the industry, to my family, friends. Like, again, so much of this was wrapped up in my identity of what success was. And that was tied to wealth or being a successful founder. And then when I got into this business and realized that Fluff was not going to be anything like Frank Body, and how could I ever expect it to when we had such a sort of different ideal or marketing approach. And thank goodness too, because if I wanted it to be like Frank Body, I would have just stayed there and done the same things. So It's been, again, in my personal life and personal journey has been so tied to the journey of Fluff. And I sort of started with this idea that beauty could be more than makeup. So what could it be? And we realized that a lot of these consumers, like myself, were feeling disengaged and disheartened by the beauty industry. They didn't want to read another celebrity top shelf. They were tired of hearing like the same slogans, and I felt that urge that people just wanted to be themselves. They didn't want to look like everybody else, which I know you recently wrote about how brands have since taken that and made this trend of you, and how we're sort of like profiting off or exploiting that idea too, which is just what happens. All of these like well-intentioned ideas just then become the strapline for brands. But I started thinking, cool, well, what other definitions are there of beauty? And for me, it was like, yes, there is the aesthetic version, but then there's a lot of internal experiences I've had of feeling beauty that haven't been tied to a product or haven't been tied to reading about someone else and wanting to be like them, but rather just sort of celebrating me or myself and my experience. So that was where we still have our editorial platform called Issues, where our consumers and our customers write in not about, their favorite makeup trend or craze or how fillers changed their life or something like that. They write about, just how much they love being alone, or they write about their recent breakup, or they write about their thoughts and feelings about their relationship to beauty, or they write about the internet, or they write about their dog. It's just like beauty is more on just like reflecting or awareness, and we wanted to expand the conversation. That platform sort of looks after itself and we have regular contributions, but finding a way to monetize that is very difficult. I don't think it's impossible, but I haven't yet figured out how. And when I also look back and reflect on publications like Rookie Mag from Tavi, how she also closed that because she couldn't find the balance between it being like authentically what she wanted it to be, and then a model that made money and paid its writers. And so it's really tricky, but I think I come full circle to be like, that compact is really like a vehicle for me to get in front of people. I'm trying to explore this idea of makeup as art now, and what else people can have that speaks to them, because I personally really feel like it's not bad to have things. I love things. I think it's an extension of who I am, because everything in my house or the clothes I wear, even if it's all black, is like me signaling something to someone, and it has a story, whether it's about who made it or how it makes me feel. And I think makeup can be that too. And that's where I actually think things went a bit wrong, was that makeup just became this disposable thing with no value assigned to it. You know, people talk about fashion in this incredible way. They talk about jewelry with this sense of connection to something else. But makeup just became so individual, but also something you just throw away and don't give a second thought to. And most of our inspiration comes from the past, in looking at Art Deco, like cigarette cases or vanity compacts, where it was like jewelry, and women in particular wanted to display that on their counter. They wanted to show it to their friends. It was an extension of them, and something that they also had for a long time, and it was like passed down. And I'm like, why did we go away from that? Can we bring that back? Maybe that means that, you know, we produce a really expensive product in comparison to the plastic compacts that are out there, but what is wrong with that? You know, maybe people should spend a little bit more on something, but it's something that they have forever and that they know where it comes from. And so that's sort of like, I could go on forever about this, but that's the beginning. And there's honestly, I probably spend every second day being like, how did we end up here? Does this feel good? You know, how do we grow slowly? And where am I, what growth am I actually chasing? Because it is no longer that $200 million mark. And I know chasing that would just mean cutting so many corners, definitely screwing people over. Like, someone is losing when a business is winning that much. So for me, it's like, what is that end goal for us? And but also, how many people do I want to impact with our message? And that's the internal conflict I have, because I have seen how Fluff, our messaging and our product, has changed people's relationship to makeup, relationship to beauty, relationship to things and consumption. So on those days, I think I do want everyone to know about Fluff, and the more people who have it, the better. But I know that for me, just going slower has mean we've made more conscious decisions around that.
Yeah, I love the idea of just like being conscious about your growth. And it's interesting to me because like it seems like the more your messaging spreads, like it would have like an inverse impact on sales. Like if you're encouraging people to really be more mindful about like their relationship to things and products and consumption, you're creating a consumer base that is much more conscious with their purchases and their consumption, and is buying fewer things in slow succession. So it's really interesting, like, problem that you've created for yourself, but like an admirable one in many ways.
Yes, our original investor deck said that we had a backwards business model, in that we were a makeup brand trying to convince customers to buy and wear less, using social media to tell people to get off their phones. And so I was very aware of, I guess, the irony or what I was trying to achieve, and very quickly learned that this was not going to be a brand that scaled and sold in 5 years, that this was a much longer project, and actually now is something that I get so much more value out of thinking it's going to be a longer project. Like what a great kind of lifelong commitment to have alongside other things that I do, as opposed to like chasing this end goal. And then I experience on the other side lots of founders around me who are chasing that 5-year sort of churn and burn, and to be really honest, none of them are happy. They're very stressed and they're lacking that sense of connection or purpose.
Yeah. I mean, I see that in founders and brands. I see that in customers too. It's like we're chasing different things, like, but the end result is the same with this just like rapid consumption, or the goal of like growth just for growth's sake, or like consuming for consuming's sake, like getting that dopamine rush from the add to cart. Like it's just inherently unfulfilling. And I think we're just at this like pivot point in history where like it's easy to get like apathetic about it and like sort of just give up, because it's like, well, what is the other way? Like that other path just like isn't quite clear yet. And I think it's really interesting to watch a brand like yours like navigate this space. I mean, another question I had for you is just like, it feels like the beauty industry, well, it feels like it's shown that the beauty industry is growing at like a pretty rapid rate. Like we're in the midst of a beauty boom. Sales are up overall, but I'm interested in like how that tracks for like an indie brand. Does like, is it like a, you know, a rising tide, you know, what's the phrase? Like something all ships. Is it good that the industry is in growth? Is it more like competition, so it's harder for a smaller brand? Like how do these like numbers overall sort of impact like how easy or hard it is for you and Fluff to thrive?
And look, I think we have a very sort of unique experience at Fluff. Like I can only answer it for Fluff and not for every other indie beauty brand. I see the sort of traditional beauty lens come into play in terms of like PR and trends that people will pick up on, whether that's just like everyone's talking about bronzers. So we literally will see inquiries coming about, oh, can we take a photo of your bronzer? Or we want to feature it in this thing. Or the strawberry makeup trend being like, oh, you've got a red blush. Could that be used across? So I see that trickle down. But otherwise, like we have sort of tried to stay on the outside of the traditional beauty industry. Initially, not by choice, just nobody liked what I was talking about and felt like that I was too aggressive with our messaging, which was a big lesson for me.
Relate.
I'm sure you can relate. And then I kind of realized that, I do have to sort of tone down and hear the other side of the story. So, but you know what? Like, I'm grateful for that sort of separation with the rest of the industry. I think it's been really good for me personally, because then I didn't have to participate. And the best advice I got was from one of the few reputable beauty brands in the industry, or that I at least admire. And they said that the best thing I could do was try to stay outside of the industry. And because if you are trying to be like everyone else or compare yourself, you will not be your own thing. And so that's really helped us. And because we only have these two core products, it means that we don't get pulled into what everyone else is sort of doing or bucketed in that. So that's why I say our experience is different. But I find if we want to use words like competition, the biggest thing we have to compete with is just the budget of the big beauty brands or the followings of the celebrity brands. And that's, it's really difficult. And the price points as well sometimes. So that makes it hard. But if the other end of that is us just giving up and being like, well, why would we bother? You know, that seems silly, because I feel like what we have that those other brands don't have is this strong message and connection. And what I'm really,
you have a point of view.
And what I'm really curious about and interested in your opinion is that a lot of these celebrity brands, right, are still in their infancy. And I'm so curious if Hailey Bieber if Rhode will have relevance in 10 years, 15 years time.
Right.
Will any beauty brand have relevance in 15, 20 years time? Like, my question is, are we done with the Cliniques or the Estee Lauders or these heritage beauty brands? Like, who, if any, that exists now that is under 10 years old, can you see being a heritage brand later on?
Oh man, that's a great
Yeah.
question. It's not something I've really thought about. I don't think celebrity beauty will stand the test of time. I don't think it will like stand the test of the decade even. Like, I think this is kind of a flash in the pan moment for the industry. Because I think it's just getting so saturated that it's almost a joke, you know? It's like somehow these brands are still succeeding, but also now every time a new one is launched, there's like an eye roll. You know,
Yes.
there's an eye roll on social media and even in the traditional media where it's like, okay, do we need another celebrity beauty brand? So I don't think that, you know, for instance, Rhode will last a particularly long time. You know, if you had asked me like 2 years ago, I would have been like, oh, probably Glossier will be like the new version of the heritage brand. But even that seems to be like on the decline, on the way out. Like, a lot of their business model of direct to consumer, cut out the middleman, like isn't really working for them anymore. Like, I know they're in Sephora's now,
Yeah.
which I find kind of interesting. And people are, I think, sort of pushing back on this like no makeup clean girl aesthetic a little bit more than they were in the past. I think if any brands have like staying power, it's probably like skincare. I think like skincare brands are probably going to have more like longevity than makeup brands for some reason. I'm trying to think of examples. Like,
I find it really interesting and fascinating for me that a company like Glossier that can be posting, you know, annual revenue of something like $275 million, yet being written up across the internet as a brand that is potentially failing. You know, it's like, how do those two statements exist together? But this is again where people, or, you know, the glossy side of social media and the entrepreneurial space or the startup space, in that we look at revenue and we don't look at profit, and we don't look at, you know, the cost to scale or the cost to be that big.
Right. Yeah. And then once you get that big, like what hope is there to scale? How much more can you possibly scale? How can you retain all of those customers? So I think like a brand like Glossier is really attractive in the beginning because it reaches a huge amount of people. It pulls them in. But I mean, I think you hit a wall at some point, especially now with the way the beauty industry is, with the proliferation of brands. There's so much.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I don't know what brands can talk about. I think there's very little product innovation left that isn't just ridiculous and outlandish. That's why I think it's very much more about sort of like a return and going back to more simplistic ideas. But I just find even with our products, like there's not much left to say even. And you see brands doing that, just regurgitating everything. And that's why I'm like, what we have to say has to be outside of products, has to be outside of the exterior.
Yeah. I mean, I think beauty is sort of like this infinitely rich topic. You can never run out of things to say about beauty. You can never run out of thoughts to have about beauty. I think you can run out of things to say about like your physical appearance and defining it in this very narrow way. But like beauty, for what it really is, I mean, you can't exhaust it. You can't exhaust the topic. But brands who are talking about like anti-aging, like you can exhaust that. That's narrow. It's impossible. It's not like a human thing. It's not a fulfilling pursuit.
Yeah.
That you're going to tap out of. But like beauty, the exploration of beauty, the questioning of what it really is and what it means to us is you know, infinite, I think, to me.
Yeah, definitely. I have two more questions for you, but I'm conscious of time.
Okay.
So if you have any more that you wanted
good.
to ask me, I think one of the things was you mentioned at the start, and this is kind of like how we close it off, that you were sort of like this idea of um, freedom for you, or working towards potentially what your minimum would be of participation in the beauty industry.
Mm.
And I know you've written about your skincare routine and minimizing that in terms of like, I think jojoba oils, like your go-to if it still is. And I feel very similar
Yeah.
just about like using oils. Like I just think moisturization is all that's required. But I'm curious, like what your relationship to makeup specifically is. And of course,
Mm.
everyone's got their own personal definition, but I'd love to know what yours is, or if there are makeup products that you do enjoy and what it is that they give to you.
There are definitely makeup products that I use, but I would say my relationship to makeup is one of like self rejection rather than self expression.
Mm,
What makeup I do still use, which is, I mean, greatly reduced from what I used to use, is still about like hiding and coverage and meeting a certain standard. I don't wear makeup every day, but usually for like a professional engagement, from like going on a date or something, I will still put a little bit of concealer on my acne scars because I'm very insecure about that. Um, I'll put on like a little bit of blush because I'm really pale and I'm insecure about that. And then my eyebrows, I have like basically bald eyebrows because I have trichotillomania, which is like a stress disorder where I pull the hairs out of my eyebrows. Like some people do it on their head or their eyelashes. My eyebrows are my particular poison. So I fill in my eyebrows. And to me, all of like none of that is about self expression. None of that is about like joy in makeup. That's about like covering up a
mm,
perceived flaw. And I think like my relationship to makeup, I'm constantly thinking about it, renegotiating it. I hope to be able to like step away from all of that someday, but it's a process and I've been working on it for like almost a decade now and still going. So I would love to get to a point where I just feel like completely comfortable and at ease in public with nothing.
mm. Do you feel
Yeah.
like it's a progression to be able to even express that and say that though? Whereas previously, or for a lot of
Oh, for sure.
people, we would use that. I feel good. It's this, as opposed to saying, "Yeah, I'm
Mhm.
covering something up. Like I'm insecure about this."
I feel like a lot more confident about my relationship to beauty, being able to say that matter of factly.
Yeah, to be
Um,
confident about
I
our
feel
insecurities feels so strange, but it's great.
it does, but it feels like it is such a deeper level of self knowing, um, to be able to look at my behaviors, understand my motivations, know that I want to actively be like working towards letting go of some of these coping mechanisms and to know that I'm not there yet. Like there's so much self-knowledge and self-discovery and like, you know, feeling like I know who I am in that I never had when I was saying, "Oh, my full face makeup routine is about self-love and self-expression and self-care."
Totally.
Like at that time, I had no idea who myself was. Now I do. And so like talking about how I personally am divesting from beauty self feels so much more like self-care and self-love than any of my previous beauty behaviors ever did.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like, yeah, your relationship, like I feel the fraudness that you said, but I also feel the like
Mhm.
the freedom that you are experiencing at times too, which is really nice.
Yeah, it's a constant back and forth, but it's a nice back and forth because
Yeah,
it means like I'm engaging with things that are important to me and thinking about them deeply and not just like mindlessly
yeah,
consuming
yeah, I love
or
that.
performing anymore.
And I
Yeah.
wanted to thank you too, because like your writing has really helped my own like personal inquiry. And then, yeah, it's helped
Oh,
keep me honest at Fluff and be like, why are we doing some of the things we're doing? Is this necessary? Um,
that makes me feel so good.
Yeah,
Thank
of
you.
course. And that was my last sort of question to you was, it's maybe a little bit tongue in cheek or without asking you to consult, but I'm so happy for you to
Yeah.
challenge me on Fluff and be like, think about this or do this differently. Like I wondered if there's
Right.
anything you would. And it's maybe it's a challenge to a lot of brands too, but or
Mhm.
if there's something specifically.
I mean, if I were going to challenge you specifically, and like I truly do admire what you're doing. You're like, there are very few brands who would like ask me to be on a branded podcast where I would be like, sure. So I hope that comes through. My like one challenge would be like to consider like if someone feels more with makeup, how could they not feel like less without? Like that, I would love like a deep exploration of that. Like how can we hold those two things? What does it feel like? What does it mean to like feel more with?
Yeah, I know.
I don't know.
It's a really big question.
It is. And it's something I've been thinking about and I can't quite like articulate my questioning of it either. But I think it's like a really interesting marketing line.
Yeah, same.
Ethos. And I just like wonder, like, is that possible? Is it possible? I mean, maybe it is.
Yeah, I had to sort of finish it off. We had this really funny experience where, you know, I set out to try and convince some people to wear less makeup. And then we had several people come into our original store and say, I never wore makeup before Fluff, and now I am. And I was like, oh, that wasn't the point. I was trying to get people to stop. And I'm like, now you are. And I was like, have I done a bad job? But they were like, oh, it's the first time I sort of could see myself in a brand or felt like you weren't making me feel less without it. And I was like, yeah, there's something here. And I think it's a really great challenge that I don't have the answer for straight away, and probably does just take more questioning and inquiry from me with our customers. And it's a nice reminder, because I think as a beauty founder, you can get so caught up in your stakeholder conversations, your P&Ls, and you forget why you're potentially creating a brand or a product. If it's not just for your own selfish reasons, if it is for a consumer to like keep talking to them and keep asking them where they're at.
Yeah. I mean, what I love about that line though is that like it feels like very philosophical. Like there isn't going to be an answer. True. And like that's kind of the point, is just to keep questioning, which I appreciate.
Thank you. Well, yeah, thank you so much. Like I feel like we could talk for a very long time. I will, when we put this up, link to obviously your newsletter, which I love and read religiously. And I hope that your book writing is going well. I'm also writing a book, and I said to my friend the other day, I said, writing a book isn't hard, it's just so boring, because you just have to keep going, and you just have to keep typing.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Well, keep me posted. That's really exciting.
Yeah, it's very much just these sort of conversations and trying to find the common influences for people about their relationship to beauty, just so that more people can potentially inquire with themselves and think about it.
I love that.
But yeah, I look forward to reading yours.
Yeah, right back at you.
Thank you. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your night.
Yes. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much. I'll speak to you soon. Bye.
Thanks.